Hey everyone, good morning. It is me, Adrian Jr., one of three individuals who contribute to the PozLife.com. The other individuals are Thomas and Patrick. I'm also going to shout out Elevated Elite. It's something new that me and my bestie D has started. Um, Today I'm going to do a blog about National Black HIV/AIDS Awareness Day. This is today's February 7th, and this is the day that we are to um, recognize the impact that HIV is having on the African American community. Um, it's a day that's very near and dear to my heart, only because I am personally affected by this epidemic that is consistently being seen in the African American community, especially as it relates to um, young black gay men or young gay men of color in general. So I kind of wanted to, excuse me, kind of go over my own personal story about how I found out that I was, HIV positive and the things that I've been through. You can also check out my story on my organization's blog, the Ohio AIDS Coalition .org. And if you go to the wellness, they'll say blog and the wellness times on one of the tabs at the top, you'll be able to read a little bit about my story. And then I'll also post it online and things of that nature. So going back to 2009, I started to get really sick. I started to get boils, and I was wondering, where these boils coming from. And I went to my mother and I asked her. I was like, "Hey, I know her boyfriend at the time. I know such and such gets boils. Can you tell me, what's happening, maybe?" And she was like, "Well, when people work out consistently and they're active in sports, they tend to get them." And so I was like, "Okay, great." Well, not great, but I was like, "Okay." So I went to the urgent care, and then I got seen by a physician there, and then they gave me an antibiotic. So I took the antibiotic, finished the not diagnosis, but finished the regimen that they gave me, but I started to get sick. I started to get rashes all over, started to feel weak. So then I went to the ER with my auntie. She took me to the ER. We sat there. I was feeling horrible, could hardly move. They admitted me. They did a whole bunch of tests. They put fluids in my body and things of that nature. Besides and it turns out what put me in the hospital is that I was allergic to the medication that the urgent care had prescribed to me. But also during the hospital, they were like, we understand that you're allergic to this medication, but there are things happening to your body that aren't normal. I guess normal to an allergic reaction, or normal as it relates to an allergic reaction. So they asked me at the somewhat end, it's like, "Hey, have you ever had an HIV test?" And before I had one test before, one HIV test before, and that's it. Like many young African American gay men, I was not as knowledgeable as I should have been about HIV. And so, which due to many factors, right? Because I was raised in the church, heavy in the church, because, I was raised in a black family. So HIV wasn't discussed in depth, and homosexuality was just a no-no. And then all those factors combined, you're just like, out of sight, out of mind, right? And plus, I wasn't learning about it in school either. So they did the tests. I was released from the hospital. I was like, yes, but I didn't get my results. So I believe that next week I had called the nurse and I was like, "Hey, I didn't get my results. Can you tell me?" And she told me that I was HIV negative, and I was like, phew. So continued on with my weeks, with my months. Fast forward to my birthday, July 31st of 2009. I went to my family physician, and I was at work, and on my lunch break, I went to my family physician for my follow-up appointment. I was happy, I was smiling, the sun was shining, it was my birthday weekend, I was going to celebrate, and he walks into the office, and he's like, "Oh, you seem very happy to have heard the news that you just heard." And I was like, "What do you mean?" So, of course, I'm like, "Can you elaborate?" And so that's when he told me that I was not HIV positive, but I had full-blown AIDS. My CD4 count was 2, and I don't remember the viral load, but it was in the not triple, but the 6 figures. I have a folder that's this thick of my HIV journey when it comes to medications, hospitalizations, and things of that nature. And so I took that in, went back to work, acted as if nothing happened, um, went home. My mom was out of town at the time. The first person I told was my Uncle Junior. Um, he had lived, he was living in Dane, Ohio at the time. And so when my mom came back from out of town, I remember we were at my grandmother's house, and we were standing outside in the yard, and she was asking me because she had known I was in the ER. She asked me, "Is everything okay? How was your follow-up appointment?" And at that moment, I just broke down in tears, um, and I mumbled the words, "I have AIDS." Um, to this day, that moment will always resonate with me because after I said that to my mother, she grabbed me in her arms, put me in her arms, and she whispered in my ear, "We will get through this." To hear those words by my mother were like the most amazing, it was the most amazing moment in life. My mother is someone who is definitely strong-minded, can be stubborn at times, sometimes hard to talk to, or was hard to talk to, for me anyway. But at that moment, I knew that even though she had had my back, of course, my whole life, it was just like, wow. So we're both crying, we're hugging. My grandparents are asking what's wrong. We don't say anything. Um, and it wasn't until I started to develop seizures. Um, I believe I had developed something called PML. I can't remember how it's pronounced, but I developed that and started to develop seizures. Um, and I remember the first seizure I had. It was summer. I was visiting my grandparents, um, and I went back into the car to leave. And I sat there for a moment, and my hand just started shriveling up like this, like both of them. It was getting harder and harder to pull them apart. And at that time, I was like, okay, I'm not going to drive. So I walked back inside, and the closer I get to the backyard to where my grandparents and family was, I started feeling more and more horrible. Like, I can't describe the feeling. I reach to get to the door, to the back door, and all of a sudden I fall. And then that's when it happened. When I awoke, all of a sudden my aunt was praying over me. She was leaning over me. My family was telling me to calm down, to stay on the floor. I was freaking out. My grandfather was pacing back and forth. Like, at that time, they, along with me, thought I was done. I had busted my head in the back. Blood was all over the tile floor. My mom at the time was at church. Oh my gosh, I'm getting teary-eyed. My mom at the time was at the church, and so they kept trying to call her, but church, your phone's on silent. So she finally checked her voicemails and rushed to my grandparents' house, and they got an ambulance, rushed her to the hospital. Oh man, that was like my second or third hospitalization, and I was in the bed, the hospital bed, and I remember my doctor and the nurse being ready to tell my mom that your son is not going to make it. And at that moment, my mom could have freaked out. She could have did whatever the case may be, but she simply held my hand and she said, "You are not going to give up." She said, "God has a plan and a purpose for your life, and you are going to make it through." And it was at that moment, another moment, that I was like, because I was terrified. In my mind, I was thinking, this is it. I'm not going to make it. I'm going to die. My mom's going to have to bury me. I'm not going to be able to do this. Praise be to God. I got through it. Was in the hospital for a minute. Um, at that time, I was taking like up to 15 to 20 medications, some for the HIV, some for the seizures, some for the side effects of both medications. At the time, I was also working as a human resources and associate relations manager at an organization and a company. And there were times when I would walk into work with an IV in my arm. I would walk into church with an IV in my arm. I was still doing my best to try to, because at the time I was a dance ministry leader, still trying to do my best to, keep up with those responsibilities as well as be as active as I could in the church. It was just a lot. In and out of hospitals, needles being stuck in me, blood being drawn once a month. At one point, being entered just so they can study me because at the time I had what was called a death strand, and they really thought I was not going to make it. So, fast forward, I had moved. Me and my ex had moved to Cleveland, and I had moved there for a job opportunity. Um, and then the reason we had to come back to Dayton is because I believe a few months, maybe 4 to 6 months after moving to Cleveland, I had developed another seizure, and it was the worst one that I had developed. Um, I remember us coming back from Walmart, and um, the lights inside Walmart being so bright that I had to ask him to leave. Like, it was giving me this massive headache. And so we went back to the apartment, and I quickly started to like lose speech. I was trying to mumble words. He was in the restroom, and I was trying to mumble words, and he kept saying, "What?" And all of a sudden, I lost my sight. I couldn't speak. He had to call the ambulance. Um, After that, I don't remember anything. I remember bits and pieces. Like, I remember me being unable to recognize him or to know his name. Um, he told me that at one point when they had me in the hospital room, I was like frozen. Like, I was just laying there frozen, couldn't move. I can't remember how long he said it was for, but I think it was like 45 minutes to an hour, maybe even more, to where actually it was longer because it happened that whole night. And I was just like a bored. And I remember him saying he got pissed because the physicians would bring in students to study me, and all these people were in the room and they were looking at me and they were taking notes, trying to figure out what was going on. And he ended up having to call my mother. My mother came up, um, and them two, stood by my side. And when I finally awoke, you know, um, it was not easy. So of course my mother, she was like, "You are coming back home." So I moved in with her, so she can kind of monitor me and things of that nature. Um, and then it was at a moment in Cleveland. I'm at the Cleveland Hospital where I laid in bed and I was like, you know what, this is an epiphany. I need to do something. I need to make sure that I can do all in my power to keep any other young black gay man or any other person from going through what I've been going through. At that moment, I decided that I was going to work my ass off in this field. Moved back to Dayton, joined a local empowerment group under AIDS Research Center of Ohio called ABBA Empowerment, was the outreach person, made connections and partnerships within the community, did testing and things of that nature. Found out there was a position called the Outreach Services Specialist in Columbus, Ohio, working for the Greater Columbus Empowerment Center, again under AIDS Research Center of Ohio. Obtained that position. My job was to make partnerships and connections while keeping the ones that we had. I was able to meet senators, legislators, council members. I was able to connect with organizations, help us to get events, help us to get our name out there, promotions, marketing, things of that nature. At that time, I became chairperson of the World AIDS Day Committee for the City of Columbus, chairperson of the National Black HIV/AIDS Awareness Day Committee, was involved in Columbus Urban Pride. At that time, I was a writer for our local magazine called Quorum Columbus. Um, After that, there was a position at the health department. Applied, got it. They wanted me. I was the disease intervention specialist for for young African American MSM. My job was to do testing, was to go out to the community, do programming, do events for that population, to educate, to empower them, and things of that nature. It was during that time that I dabbled even more into politics and learned the ins and outs as it relates to public policy and the health department and things of that nature and the structure. All that good stuff. Got more involved into the community. Started speaking more. Started, speaking at universities, high schools, community colleges, speaking at events about HIV/AIDS, telling my story, or simply just, talking about the HIV epidemic, teaching classes, things of that nature. I then joined the Ohio AIDS Coalition as the program coordinator this past June in 2015. There, my job is to, do programming for HIV positive Ohioans. We're a public policy organization, so we definitely are all about changing HIV criminalization laws. We do programming around newly diagnosis, women's programming, young programming. We're going to start doing a HIV and transgender programming. We're doing all these wonderful things with an organization. Recently was blessed enough to be now the program manager of the Ohio AIDS Coalition. Still doing the same things that I was doing: grant writing, budgeting, things of that nature. Definitely blessed to have gone to, summits, in different parts of the country. Young Black Gay Leadership Initiative, shout out to them. They put on a wonderful summit every year to make sure that they're engaging young African American MSM to be the best that they can be, teaching them things about public policy as it relates to HIV and AIDS, leadership, networking, resume building, all these things. Got the opportunity to be a USCA scholar, another grand opportunity to where I got to network and meet professionals around the country. Got to attend the NASM conference, got to attend USCA twice. The door has been opened, and I believe that this is my purpose, this is my field. God has put me in this position to make sure that I do all that I can to prevent another young person to be affected, not affected, but infected by this virus. Infected and affected. To make sure that I hold true to the vow that I made to him in the bed, in the hospital bed in Cleveland, Ohio. And to this day, I am determined to fight. Right now, African Americans are disproportionately affected as it relates to HIV and AIDS, but not even that. Homelessness, housing, food, economic status, disproportionately affected, and then to put on top of that all these social justice issues that currently our race and our culture are going through right now. I'm a firm believer that testing is only one part of the puzzle. Which is why during these leadership summits that that me and my organization are trying to plan as it relates to the Youth Leadership Summit, the conference that we just had, is to make sure that we're not only talking about testing, but also that we're talking about empowering those who are HIV positive to advocate not only for their communities but for themselves. You have to start with yourself first. If you do not start with yourself, then it's going to be very hard for you to empower others if you're not empowering yourself. And that's something I had to learn the hard way. I'm still struggling with that, still struggling to make sure that I take care of myself mentally, spiritually, emotionally, as well as physically. I have people telling me all the time, Adrian, you need to take care of yourself. You need to slow down. I have our pharmacy staff who are kind enough to send me emails saying, hey, Adrian, you have medication here. Don't forget to pick it up. Hey, Adrian, don't forget your appointment. It is absolutely imperative because you have to take care of yourself. And when we're talking about HIV and those who are infected, we also have to talk about the other barriers that they're facing: homelessness, survival sex. Who is going to be worried about their HIV when they need a roof over their head, or they need food in their mouth, or they need transportation to get to and from work, or they have a child that they have to worry about to make sure that they take care of? That is not going to happen. So we have to start addressing and doing things that are going to make sure that we break down those barriers in order to make sure that individuals are living holistically well. That should be the goal. That should be the mission of every ASO within this country, within this world, is to live holistically well. Not worried about just the HIV piece, but worry about all these other things that impact that individual, that can lead up to them contracting HIV or them not staying in care. I'm definitely someone who believes in, having sex. That, yes, have sex. That's what sex is here for. You're supposed to, well, not you're supposed to, but it's okay to engage in sex and whatever type of sex you want. We got into this community, or not community, but this world, this ideology to where we're sex shaming individuals for liking the things that they like, for engaging in certain sexual acts. Forget that. As long as they're doing it safely and what they deemed as being safe, then they're good. If they don't want to use condoms, which of course, if you don't use condoms, even though you're on PrEP, you have the risk of getting syphilis, gonorrhea, chlamydia, things of that nature. But, if they, whatever your sex life is, do it safely. Use PrEP. I'm I may get, in trouble for saying this, but reality is a lot of people don't use condoms, point blank, whatever the case may be. If that's the case, make sure you and your partner are on PrEP. If you're dating somebody who's HIV positive, make sure you're on PrEP. Make sure they're staying on top of their medications, taking them daily, seeing their doctor, and things of that nature. Make sure that with this wonderful, hot, great, amazing sex that you're having, make sure that you're doing what you need to do to protect yourself. And whatever that is, you have to sit down and you have to figure out what that means for you. What does safe sex mean for you? Because it may not mean the same thing for me as it does you, or as it does Johnny, Sue, Michael, whatever the case may be. Sit down, figure out what safe sex is for you, and make sure that you instill those necessary components and properties within your life. You have to make sure that you are able to do this safely as it relates to you. So, like I said, today is National Black HIV/AIDS Awareness Day. Make sure that you do testing. Make sure that you educate yourself. I implore you to attend an event in your community. I am sure that if you go on a website and you look up National Black HIV/AIDS Awareness Day, that you'll be able to find something. And if you cannot find anything, then I implore you to take that as a challenge and to build something within your community to talk about HIV, especially as it relates to African Americans. And I implore churches, I implore you that if you do not have a healthcare ministry, if you don't have an HIV/AIDS ministry, you need to do that. You need to make sure that you are having something within your church that will service the health of your congregation. Because if you're just worried about just keeping them spiritually fed that one day or that week, then that's not going to do it. A church is definitely a place that should represent being holistically well. That means mentally, spiritually, emotionally, financially, whatever the case may be. People should be able to, if no place else, be able to go to the church and get holistic services. I implore you to incorporate that into your ministries and into your church. I'm going to give a few statistics. So for example, in Ohio right now, well, not in Ohio right now, but in Ohio in 2014, African Americans accounted for 52% of all persons diagnosed as HIV positive, making them nine times more likely to be diagnosed compared to whites. 44% of all people living with HIV in Ohio are black and African American. Since African Americans make up 13% of Ohio's population, you can see how disproportionately this community is as it relates to HIV and AIDS. And if you look online at the CDC, you will see even more how HIV is affecting the country, especially with African Americans making up only 12% of the population. So again, I implore you to educate yourself, do testing, have those hard conversations with individuals. That needs to be happening. That needs to be happening. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. You can contact me on Facebook. You can contact me on work. My work number is 614-444-1683. You can contact me via email, neilhobson@Ohio AIDS Coalition. You can contact me on our website at the ohioaidscoalition.org. We have an opportunity for you to ask questions and things of that nature. Please, I would rather you bombard me with questions and things of that nature than go out and do something that you may end up regretting for the rest of your life. So again, I love you. Please do something on this day. Please do something on this day. If nothing else, and let us all make sure that we, are fighting this great fight. And a quote that I enjoy heavily, that is by Martin Luther King Jr. It says, "An individual has not started living until he can rise above the narrow confines of his individualistic concerns to the broader concerns of all humanity." I challenge you to start living today. I challenge you to start living and start thinking of others and start building our community. I challenge you. Again, I love you all. My name is Adrian Neal Jr. from the Poz Life, from Elevated Elite. Yeah, everyone have a great day, have a great Sunday, and I'll see you soon.